when the walls fell silent. The sun had not yet crested the eastern hills when Joshua rose from his knees. The camp of Israel lay still behind him, thousands of tents stretched across the plain like a sea of waiting hearts. For 6 days they had marched in silence around the city of Jericho, armed men in the front, priests carrying the ark in the center, and the people behind them, forbidden to speak. 6 days of dust and heat. 6 days of mockery from walls. 6 days of obedience without explanation. Joshua had not slept much. He remembered another morning, 40 years earlier, when he and Caleb returned from this same land with hopeful words while fear spread like rot through the camp. He remembered how an entire generation chose terror over trust, and how their bones now rested beneath desert sand. This morning would not be like that. The priests stood ready, ram's horns polished and heavy in their hands. The Ark of the Covenant, symbol of the Lord's presence, waited at the center, borne on poles by chosen men. Joshua walked the line once more, his eyes searching faces. Some were young, born in the wilderness. Others were old, weathered by years of wandering. All were quiet. He lifted his staff. "Today," he said softly, "you will see the Lord act." At his signal, they began the 7th march. Once, twice. By the 3rd circuit, the sun burned high, sweat-darkened tunics, and legs ached. From the walls of Jericho, the people watched, some in scorn, some in fear, some in confusion. No battering rams struck the gates. No ladders rose. No arrows flew. Only feet on dirt. Only priests walking. Only silence. By the 6th circuit, Joshua felt the weight of command settle fully upon him. He remembered Moses' voice, steady and grave. "Be strong and courageous." He remembered the Lord's promise at the Jordan, when the waters piled up and the people crossed on dry ground. The same God stood with them now. The 7th circuit began. Joshua raised his hand. The priests brought the horns to their lips. "Shout," Joshua commanded, "for the Lord has given you the city." The sound that followed was not one noise, but many, horns blaring, voices crying out, faith erupting after days of restraint. The earth seemed to tremble. Stones cracked. Mortar split. The walls of Jericho, thick, ancient, proud, collapsed inward upon themselves as if pushed by an unseen hand. Silence followed, stunned and absolute. Then Joshua gave the order. The city fell. Fire consumed what was devoted to destruction. Gold and silver were gathered for the treasury of the Lord. Rahab and her household were spared, just as promised, her scarlet cord still hanging from the shattered wall. Victory spread through the camp like dawn. But obedience, once tested, would be tested again. Not far from Jericho lay Ai, smaller, weaker, unimpressive. Joshua sent spies who returned confident. "Do not trouble all the people," they said. "A few thousand will do." Joshua agreed. The attack failed. Men fled. 36 died. The hearts of the people melted. Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down before the ark, his voice breaking. "Why, Lord? Why bring us across the Jordan only to hand us to our enemies?" The answer came swiftly and sharply. Israel has sinned. One man, Achan, had taken what was devoted to the Lord, silver, gold, a fine cloak. Hidden beneath his tent, buried under silence and selfishness, his sin brought defeat to the nation. When the truth was uncovered, judgment followed. The camp learned a hard lesson. God's power is not a tool to be wielded, it is a presence to be honored. Only then did victory return. Years passed. Battles were fought. Land was divided. Joshua grew old. On a hill overlooking Shechem, he gathered the people one last time. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the assembly. He spoke not of conquest, but of faithfulness. Not of swords, but of choice. "Choose this day whom you will serve," he said. "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." The people answered with conviction, but Joshua had lived long enough to know that words are easier than obedience. He died at peace, buried in the land he had once spied as a young man full of promise. Generations later, long after Joshua's bones returned to dust, Israel forgot. They forgot the walls. They forgot the wilderness. They forgot the Lord who had driven out nations before them. Each generation did what seemed right in its own eyes. Judges rose and fell. The people cried out. God delivered them, again and again, until even deliverance became expected, not treasured. Eventually, the people demanded a king. Saul came first, tall, strong, impressive, and fearful. He ruled by sight, not obedience. When he spared what the Lord had commanded destroyed, Samuel's words cut deep, obedience is better than sacrifice. Then came David, shepherd, musician, warrior, king. God established his throne, not because David was flawless, but because his heart returned to the Lord when broken. David fought giants and wrote songs. He ruled with justice and sinned with consequence. His life became a living psalm, praise and repentance woven together. After David came Solomon, wise beyond measure, wealthy beyond comparison. His temple gleamed with gold, and the nations listened when he spoke. God granted him wisdom unmatched, yet warned him plainly, obedience must guard wisdom, or wisdom will rot into pride. In Solomon's later years, his heart drifted. Foreign gods crept in quietly, not with war, but with compromise. The kingdom fractured after his death, split like dry wood under strain. Israel fell. Judah followed. Walls rose again, this time not to be conquered but to be defended. Prophets warned. Kings ignored. The people trusted alliances and idols more than the Lord, who had once split seas and shattered cities. Jerusalem burned. The people were carried into exile, far from the land promised to Abraham, far from the hills Joshua once walked. There, by foreign rivers, they wept and remembered Zion. Yet even in exile, God was not silent. He stirred hearts. He preserved a remnant. He promised restoration, not just of land, but of hearts. He spoke of a coming king greater than David, a servant who would bear the sins of many, a covenant written not on stone, but on hearts. Centuries passed, and in the fullness of time, the silence broke. A child was born in Bethlehem, not in a palace, but in a stable. He would walk the same hills Joshua had walked. He would teach beside the same rivers. He would speak of a kingdom not built with swords or walls. And when the time came, he would face a different kind of city, a fortress of sin and death, and instead of shouting it down, he would surrender himself to it. The walls of the grave would fall, not by might, not by power, but by the Spirit of the Lord. Historical and biblical reflection. This narrative draws from the biblical accounts found primarily in Joshua 1-24, Judges 1-2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and prophetic themes echoed throughout the Old Testament, culminating in messianic expectation fulfilled in the New Testament. Events such as the fall of Jericho, the sin of Achan, the leadership of Joshua, and the rise and decline of Israel's monarchy are historical within the biblical record. Dialogue, pacing, and internal reflections are dramatized for storytelling purposes, but do not alter the scriptural framework. The story emphasizes enduring biblical truths, obedience over spectacle, faithfulness across generations, and God's sovereign plan unfolding through human failure toward ultimate redemption.